Wilson and I make the trip to the Central Jersey Volkswagen Society's All Air-Cooled Gathering in Flanders for 2024. The event is fantastic, but the trip home does not go so well. Welcome back to the Wilson the VW Bus Podcast. I'm your host, Joe, and it is almost my favorite time of year, autumn. As I may have mentioned previously, the end of the summer and the beginning of fall is my absolute favorite time of year. I think back to when I was younger and getting ready for school and reading my Tolkien novels like The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Coincidentally, I am now watching the Rings of Power series. Again, no sponsorship here or anything, but I am absolutely loving that series. It's also great when the air gets a little cool at night and the bus runs fantastic in that type of weather. So it's a win-win for everything. Now, I'm not so crazy about my workload at that time of year because all the teachers and all the students come back to school after their summer recess, and it's really insane with the amount of stressful responsibilities that we have to deal with at work. But it's my last year in public education, so I should try to enjoy it because technically this will be my very last first day of school. I checked my calendar and made sure I've got my tickets ready for the Central Jersey Volkswagen Society's All Air-Cooled Gathering in Flanders, which is scheduled for the weekend of September 15th at the Swim and Sports Club of Flanders in Roxbury Township, New Jersey. The event starts on Friday afternoon, and camping is Friday night and Saturday night, and the show is on Sunday. So I try to take some time off of work on Friday so I can get up to Flanders without hitting any heavy traffic. But my work has got me pretty tied up, and I end up having to work from home most of the morning. I hardly have anything ready at all to go, aside from Jiffy Pop popcorn that my wife picked up for me at the supermarket. I hastily threw some clothes in a plastic bag and some ice in a cooler and grabbed a couple of drinks and a box of chocolate chip cookies, the good homemade type with the big chunks of chocolate. And I run and grab a sub sandwich from a store up the street called the Sandwich Station, which is known around town for having a great sub called a Smoking Cowboy. Now, for those of you who are not lucky enough to live in my area, a Smoking Cowboy is a turkey, bacon, and cheese with like a chipotle sauce on a sub sandwich or a grinder or a hoagie or whatever you want to call it, but it is good. And I get a large one that's going to hold me off for at least 1 or 2 meals while I'm up camping. I then checked to make sure I had my event ticket. I ran to get gas at the gas station and filled up Wilson's gas tank with premium gas for the trip. And then I headed out northbound for the hour-long drive. I've got my iPad on the dash today as I use the navigation app from Google Maps. And even though I pretty much know where I'm going, but every few minutes, my navigation directions keep trying to turn me around. What is wrong with this thing today? I soon realized that I had set the settings for no highway roads, and that just wasn't going to work. So, in the middle of my drive, I click on a couple of the buttons and settings, and we're back in business, heading up the highway to Flanders. When I get to the entrance of the campground, I see John and Doug and Catherine and Casey too, and they tell me just to go park anywhere and settle up with the entrance ticket later on. So I head over to the quiet side where I see Carl, who I parked next to last year, and a nice empty spot just across from him on the other side, figuring it would be almost diagonally across from Carl and potentially a little further away from any of the mosquitoes. This time I backed up into the spot, which turns out to be not the best move in retrospect. I'll explain that in a little bit. I unpacked my blue and white striped tent, the awning that goes onto the side of the bus, and all the tent poles, and began setting up in the final warm rays of the summer sunshine, surrounded by my fellow VW friends. Now, I haven't used the tent since Flanders of last year, but immediately I start to get a couple of people coming over and asking questions about it. I let them know that it was a home-built tent with poles from the local hardware store. It's actually just electrical conduit. And I based the design on something I had seen online. After I had set it up and everything was just about ready for me to sit down and relax and have a nice meal, Catherine came over and was looking for a jack stand. I told her that I didn't have any, but I did see Doug just around the corner, and if anyone had one, it would probably have been Doug. So Catherine's Beetle was in need of a little clutch adjustment, and by the time I got over there to see if they needed any hand, they had it all jacked up with a hydraulic jack and a bunch of logs underneath. and they're looking for a clutch cable tool, which I said, I have a brand new one on the bus, so I'll be right back. By the time I got back, we realized that my clutch tool was for a newer style clutch cable. They have the older style clutch cables, which just uses a jam nut instead of a wing nut. So Doug had no problem. He got that clutch cable adjusted, and Catherine threw on the left rear tire, and we're back on, and everything was all good. I took the time to show my registration for the event to John. Now, he's the guy with that really neat swivel seat combi bus that I spoke about a few episodes ago. And I got my sticker for Flanders, which I put on the bus, and I got my paperwork. Now it's time to go relax and enjoy that meal. It was about dusk when I sat down on the open floor of the cargo doors and opened up the cooler and reached in for that smoking cowboy sub. Hey, where's my sub? I realized all too soon that it had slid to the bottom of the cooler and into the ice water, and it was now soaking wet. Ugh, disgusting. I was going to let this get me down, though. I found the driest parts of the sandwich and made the best of it for the day. Later on that evening, I broke out my Jiffy Pop and had myself a popcorn retro dessert. To be honest, I was at the end of a very long week, and I was so tired, and I was happy just to go to bed early that night. But this time, I had an ace up my sleeve, something that would help me out a little bit better than last year, because last year, I froze my butt off. So my daughter, Sarah, remembered how cold I was, and she knitted me a super heavy-duty blanket for my Christmas present this past year. And I brought it with me on the bus, and it was super warm. It was great. So the next morning was Saturday, and I woke up to find a few more campers arriving and the smell of campground breakfast in the air. You know, campground fire and bacon, and it's nothing better. There was a space just to the right of me, and two guys pulled in, one with a really nice 74 Carmen Ghia, super low, and the other guy with the squareback VW, which we hardly see any of those anymore. They asked if the space next to me was available, and I said, sure, park right next to me. But make sure that lower Ghia is the one closest to the bus, because it was very low and looked like it belonged right next to Wilson. Turns out that both of these cars belong to the same guy, Kurt. Now, Kurt has had some troubles in his life, but you would never know by his optimistic and energetic personality. I was lucky to have met him. Had a great time with him all weekend. I took the time now to FaceTime my wife this morning and check in to see how she was doing at home, alone with the dog. And when she heard of my fiasco with the sandwich and the cooler, she said, she would drive on up to meet me for lunch and hang out for the afternoon. Well, all right. We hung out for a few hours, and we talked with the other crazy VW enthusiasts and campers. And it was at this time when I realized that I shouldn't have backed into my spot, like I was talking about earlier. You see, it was nice and sunny, and shade was at a premium. Unfortunately, my awning on the right side of the bus didn't block the sun in the hot afternoon. And if I had only been turned around the other way, well, we would all had a lot more shade to relax in. Oh well, lesson learned for next year. I enjoyed the live band and the company of my new friends that evening, but by around 11 p.m., I was ready for bed. Unfortunately, most of the other partiers didn't feel the same way, and they partied on until about 3 a.m., and it was about that time that a few people around the campground started to yell out, all right, it's time to go to bed, everybody. It stayed quiet for about 2 hours, but then about 5 a.m., someone's iPhone alarm went off, and they slept through that alarm for the next 45 minutes straight as it beeped throughout the campground. I was already up, but I'm sure there were some unhappy campers next to whoever that was. But everyone needed to be out of the campground and onto the show field on Sunday morning by 8 a.m., because the campground area was used for spectator parking. They played reveille and everybody got, moved on and pulled into the show field, and the show was great. I ran into Dave, Wilson's former owner, and Chris, the engine builder, and a bunch of other people that I've met over the years at the various VW events. I watched the tug-of-war with Casey's Beetle in the middle and had an amazing Cuban steak sandwich for lunch. It was at the end of the day, and it was all over, but I still had a nice long drive home ahead of me. I made a right turn out of the Swim and Sport Club driveway and headed out on my way home. It was about 1/8 of a mile before I hit the highway, maybe 3 miles from the event, when I happened to look back behind me in my mirror and see a plume of white smoke following my bus. Well, that's strange, I thought. I wonder what that could be. And no sooner did I look down to my dash cluster did I see the dreaded oil light on. Oh no! I immediately shut off the ignition and I coasted into a large empty parking lot. When I got out, I could see a trail of oil coming down the road and ending just under my bus. And by now, a huge puddle of oil was all over the pavement. This was not how I wanted my camping weekend to end. And now I'm alone, stranded, and a long way from home. To be continued next time.